Good morning, everyone, and welcome to part one of our SPARK.grow webinar series. My name is Phil Santer, and I am SVP of Business Development at Ann Arbor SPARK. If you're not familiar, SPARK is a public-private partnership focused on identifying and meeting the needs of businesses at every stage. And it's under that approach or banner that we have developed this two-part webinar series that we're calling SPARK.grow. For the past couple of years, we've had a Spark.ed series focused on early stage company development, but we wanted to dig into topics that are critical to companies that are looking to grow, scale, and maintain their businesses. And you are a part of part one of that on creating high potential connections between companies and future leaders. So we know in our work that talent development is critical to the success of a company, and probably more critical or growing more critical really every day. And so we're excited to share this topic with you. So it's my pleasure to introduce the founder of Phimation, Dave Haviland, who is a management consultant to stage 2 businesses to help clarify their business goals and strategies. He's been doing management consulting for many years and has a history of leading companies to scale. He's also someone we've worked with at Spark over the past several years. I'm going to turn it over to Dave now, but note that you will have a chance to ask questions. Just text them in the comment box to the organizer. And we are also recording the session, and we'll share it with everyone following the webinar. So Dave, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So Phil and I were talking about this idea, and the thing that I thought was most intriguing about it is to say high potentials are certainly a important topic for all businesses, but is there a way that we can do a webinar that's relevant both to the people who are managing and overseeing them and to the high potentials themselves? And so it was an interesting challenge, and I think got me thinking in a different way, and I'm looking forward to sharing those thoughts. So creating high potential connections is taking the perspective both from the company and saying how do we find and attract and keep high potentials, but also from the high potential side of saying what kind of companies should we look for, and what kind of companies do we want to work with, and then how do we work effectively with them. So let me just give you a little background about myself. Up at the top there, I work with about 20 small and mid-sized growth companies, and there's a lot going on in this slide. The thing I'll highlight is the practice areas. If you think about the kinds of issues that a board of directors needs to handle, which are really across all of the spectrum of what the business is dealing with, that's what I get involved in. So the topic of high potentials, I'm not coming at it from a high potential kind of expert space. I'm coming at it from, this is a topic that's come up time and again with boards and with CEOs that I've worked with. And the thinking that I'm going to share with you is how we as boards and as leadership teams have thought about what do we do about high potentials? How do we be attractive to them? And what do we look for there? And what are they interested in so that we can make sure that we're serving them effectively? If I put up the logos of my clients, you would not recognize most of them. You might recognize a few of them. But my clients' customers are ones that we all know. And so they're small businesses, but there's a level of expertise that they need to have in their business that is up at the level with the brand names that we're used to. So most of the conversations that I am in with my small companies are dealing with these bigger brands and bigger names that you see here, and how we sell to them, how we serve them, how we meet the needs that they have. At this point, I'm working with a couple dozen current leaders and a couple dozen future leaders, rising leaders. And so these are some of the folks that I've worked with. The rising leader part, the young manager part, has been a growing part of my practice for about 5 years now. There are some that I'm kind of mentoring and coaching twice a month. There are others where I'm meeting with a group of a half a dozen or a dozen of them just once a quarter when we're doing our strategy session. So all different types of people, all different types of functions, and all different structures that I work with them. But the thoughts that I'm going to share today are bringing in the thinking that they have about where they're trying to go and what they're looking for in a company. And then, of course, on the other side, on the current leader side, how we respond to that and how we make sure that we're able to attract and keep and develop the best performing people in the company. So our agenda for today is really about finding, or I'd say understanding the potential. I'm going to lay out some frameworks by which you can assess as a company, how are we doing at providing a high potential environment, and as an employee, how am I doing at becoming and fulfilling the potential that I have. So what is high potential? I'll start with, and then we'll talk about high potential talent and high potential positions. Again, the two different perspectives, and they're quite complementary, and I think useful for everybody to know both sides. Before I get into the frameworks that I have for you, just a little bit about high potential. So when I've asked in the board meetings, who are high potentials? What does that look like? The answers that I've gotten are, they're the 10Xers. You know, there are some people that can create kind of double the value that other people do. There are some people that can create 10 times the value. They just have a sixth sense. They do things that other people don't. They go the extra mile. There's a whole combination of factors that we'll look into in just a minute here of why they can get the 10X. But these have an outsized performance impact compared to the others. Customers love them. They work in our most important areas. They're really important to morale and how the company performs from a cultural perspective. And then, of course, there are future leaders too. So these are the impact on the organization of high potentials is huge and is much bigger than the numbers that you probably have in your organization. Matter of fact, I don't address that later on, so let me just talk to that now. I would say in most of my clients, we're probably high potentials are on the low side, 10% of the overall staff, and on the high side, a third. So if you're doing better than that, then that's great. And my guess is you have a very disciplined hiring process, and maybe you've lived through some bad hires and realized that you need to make sure that you're disciplined in how you hire. But for most companies, you're in that kind of 10% to a third. And if you're doing better than that, then that's great. And it would suggest also that you're probably a high-performing company overall. I want to share a framework that we use at the board level, usually about once a year, to assess our people portfolio. I work a lot with these 2x2 matrices, you know, with a y-axis and an x-axis. And so this is the one we use when we're doing our check on the people in the organization. And so on the y-axis is people's current performance, just from a general like bad, low to great on the high side. And then on the other axis is their future potential, with the possibility of a big failure, somebody really screwing things up, getting you in trouble regulatory-wise or something like that, to big success, which is, you know, launching a new part of the business or something like that. So if we were having a webinar on how to deal with your low potentials, then we would have unpacked these two boxes here. If it's bad performance and the potential is that they're going to cost your business a lot, then you're probably going to separate from them. If they're performing great, but the possibility that they have in the future is not good, then you're probably going to kind of milk them. And I would say the other thing I would add here is you're going to backfill their replacement. Why would somebody be performing well but also have the potential for failure in the future? Usually there's some kind of personal blockage or something that limits them fulfilling their potential. And so get what you can out of them, so to speak, but then also be prepared to that when things do implode, you got to be ready with an alternative. There's not a lot of people that fall into that category, but there are some. So, and that's the purpose of a framework like this. For people that have kind of moderate potential, if they're not performing well, then you want to manage them. That means manage them tightly because they're not performing well. They need help and need management oversight. And then if they are performing well, then you want to develop them, which means put them into some kind of program where you're training them. And then the focus today is people that have a lot of opportunity. So if somebody is not performing well now, but has a lot of potential, then you just have them in the wrong seat on the bus. So you want to move them. if they're performing well now and they have a lot of potential, then you want to accelerate that. And the question is, for these two boxes, and that I think we'll answer here over the next half hour, is if you were going to move them, where would you move them to? So the frameworks that I'm going to share should help with that. And then if you want to accelerate, what are the levers that you have to pull to accelerate, to do that acceleration? And that'll also get into the next webinar that we have in May, where we're going to talk about what development actually looks like. But for the frameworks that we're going to see here today are going to be like roadmaps that you could use to figure out where you want to accelerate. So just to share with you how we use this on an annual basis, we'll usually map people onto this just to get a sense of what our portfolio looks like and what individuals look like. And then we'll also look at how our investments, our development investments, are allocated around for those different people. So it's kind of a cool evaluation tool. All right, so let's get into the high potential talent angle first. And you know, a hot terminology these days is the stack. So as I put together my thoughts on this, I thought it just lined up that this is a stack that we're talking about. So multiple layers that build on each other and that interact and interoperate. And so the high potential talent stack are different pieces of a person that you would be looking for that if you, as you add them all together, build up the high potential. And the bottom three general areas that are in blue are about potential really in any job. And I'll unpack each of these here in just a second. But the bottom three are potential for any job that you would put them in. The top three are really about leadership potential and how you build their ability to be a leader. With each of these, there are three different components. And the way I think of the three different components is for a high potential person, you could score each of those on like a 1 to 5 scale. And the total for a high performing person would be a 12 or above. So you could have a 5, like awesome, 5 and a 5 and a 2, or you could have all 4s, whatever other combinations, right? 5 and a 4 and a 3. Yeah. So you've got people that not only have those components, but have them at a kind of superior level, but not completely. You don't have to be 5s on all of them. You just need to mostly be excellent overall. All right, so let's look at each one of these, starting with performance. This is simply, do you get the job done, and how well do you get the job done? And I think there are three components to that. One is quality. Do you do a good job, and do you turn in A+ work? The second is productivity. Are you able to move a lot of work through you? Do you have a lot of capacity in how you do it? And then the last is reliability. So when you are given a task, does it happen, and does it happen the way it's supposed to? Those are all kind of different and distinct components of getting the job done. And we've worked with people who are really good. They get the quality really well, but then they're slow in getting the work done, and you just don't have enough throughput. We've also worked with other people that are very productive, but you're not sure if it's actually going to happen on time. So those are the three components of performance. Then we move to value creation, and value creation I think of as like this sixth sense to know what matters and what doesn't matter. So the first one is problem solving. Problem solving is 80 to 90% of the time things happen the way they're supposed to, but there's that 10 to 20% when it doesn't, and that 10 or 20% can take 30 or 40% of the time. And so good problem solvers they're able to take that 10 and 20% in stride and keep it as close to the 10 and 20% of the time that's needed as possible. So problem solving is one. The second is a results focus. There are some people who are simply focused on a task, and when they run up against a wall, they say, "Oh yeah, I wasn't able to do it." And then there are others that say, "Oh yeah, that was a wall. I got to get around that wall. I'm still focused on getting the result that I talked about, instead of just spending 5 hours, seeing what happens, and if I get there, I get there. If I don't, I don't." And then the last piece is agility, and I think of that as nimbleness and flexibility. Again, 80% of the time, 90% of the time, things are going to happen the way they're supposed to. A lot of times they don't, and the ability to go with the flow is important. And then the last piece in potential for any job is a learning attitude, a learning approach. And at the heart of that is just having a curiosity about how the world is and the job that you're doing. There are a number of those high potential employees that I work with now as a coach, where they're just curious about why things happen that way. And as they're going about doing their job, they look at what they're doing and they say, you know, that doesn't really make sense. I should try doing it a different way. And they're just constantly engaging the world in a learning and changing and attitude. And so they are, the benefit is A, they're learning a lot, but B, they're making things better as they're tinkering all through. And then of course, complementing that is building up hard skills, which is like the ability to do actual things, and then building up the soft skills, which is, I think of hard skills as what you do and soft skills as how you do it. So having not only an attitude, but also making the effort to continue to grow in the hard skills that you have and your ability to do more, and in the soft skills and being able to handle things in a better way. Those three areas will add potential, will unlock potential in any job. Now, as we look at what I think is important from a leadership perspective, and I would say this is for the high potentials that I'm coaching on a 1 to 2 times a month basis. This is most of the work that I do is transitioning them. They have the skills and they have the stack for the potential in any job. What they don't understand is what it takes to play at the executive level. So this is what I coach them on and what I've learned is needed. So the first is investment thinking. So much of what we experience in the world we think of as a cost, and the cost is a very simple concept to understand because it's just asking for a price and then looking at that price. Investment is much harder because it involves that cost, but then it also involves looking into the future and thinking what the return on that investment is going to be. And that's way more complex. And so there's 3 important dimensions to that. The first is framing the need in the right way. We've heard that saying, I think it was Dewey that said, a problem well framed is a problem half solved. And so the ability to recognize that there are different frames that need to be brought to different situations and picking out the right one is important. Second is investment planning. So how much investment is needed? What's the plan for executing it? What are the risks involved? How do we think that the return is going to come? There's these things usually are represented in business cases when we're looking at opportunities at a board of directors level. And so it's just, it's the employee's ability to think and to develop a business case for whatever opportunity or whatever situation they're in. The last thing I'll call ROI sense, and some people just have a better sense of what's going to work out and what isn't. This obviously develops over time, so the more experienced people are, the better they have this sense. But some high potentials that I've worked with just have it because of whatever life experience they have, and others need to develop it. The ROI sense really comes from an ability to recognize risk, which is hard to see unless you have some experience doing that, and also the ability to recognize opportunity. And if you combine those two, that's where you get this ROI sense, ROI calculator that they have. Once that's in place, then you can look at maturity. And maturity to me is a combination of these 3 factors: empathy and the ability to understand that we have people all around us and we need to understand that. There's a lot of research that's been done on why highly empathetic people are actually better for business. They're able to recognize customer opportunities. They're able to engage in teams. Well, there's always a counterbalance to the need for non-empathy sometimes. Empathy is a kind of baseline skill that's needed at the leadership level. Second piece is what I'll call situational awareness, and this ties to the agility that came before, and that is building up your toolkit and then recognizing that in different situations you need different tools. I would say another piece of this that I don't have on here, but that's inherent in this term, is self-awareness. So recognizing how your tendencies are in any particular situation, and then also and also recognizing the factors that are playing in a situation and what kind of tools you need to bring into that. And then the last is relationship skills. This is the EQ, emotional quotient, and how well you're able to get along with people and work with people. I think the sophisticated part of this is where I look at having difficult conversations with people, and then constructive conflict. The willingness and ability to go into conflict, but to do it in a constructive way. Those are the kind of relationship skills that we're talking about there. And then at the top of the pyramid, I can think of no better term than just that general one of leadership. And there are a number of things that contribute to leadership. In some ways, all of the things in the stack contribute to it. But just by itself, I think there are three components that good leaders have. One is insight and foresight. They can see around corners. They can see the whole field, as I say sometimes. They can see things that other people can't see, and that's really valuable. So there's insight and foresight that they bring to the table, and that's important for a leader to be able to know what's coming down the road and plan for it and maybe prepare for it better than if you're just reacting to things. The second is being decisive. There are several current leaders that I work with who don't have this, and things hit their desk and they just do not make decisions, and it creates all kinds of problems and conflict and challenges for the business. So decisiveness is important. There are different styles to making decisions, so it's less important that what style you use and how you bring in your information, and more important that a decision gets made in the time that it needs to get made. And then the last thing is energy. And when I think of leadership, the example that I often come to is getting my kids to make their bed in the morning, because just asking them to do that will actually not change their behavior. And I can get frustrated about that. Whereas a leader, I can say it's important for them to make their beds, and the energy that's required. So my job as a leader is to infuse into the situation the energy that's required to make up the difference between what they would do on their own and what the result is that I'm looking for. It's my job as a leader to take responsibility for that and to remind them every day, to motivate them, so taking it out of the realm of kids making their bed and into the realm of a business. When there's a new initiative, one of the hardest things for a leader is to not only keep the business going on a regular basis and all the stuff that usually has to happen, but then also personally to exert the energy that's required to get the group and the team to a different place than they would have gotten to otherwise. There is simply inertia in life and in all of us, and the leader's job is to overcome that inertia. All right, so that's the angle looking from the company out to the employee or looking at the talent. I now want to look at the other direction and say, what's a high potential position look like? And this again has a stack, but the stack looks different because on the bottom there are two things that should be in place, the two components that are in blue. But the top, in a high potential position, you don't need to have all three of them. You can just have one really strongly, or you can have two of them. Maybe you have all three, but that's probably pretty unlikely. So with the talent stack, it really does build up from the bottom. I think you have to have each one of these in place as you move up. And if you're missing something, it will undermine the foundation as you move up. With the position, it's more robust, and you don't have that same kind of building factor. So the different elements starting in the blue is, first of all, what's the environment of the position? What's the context in which it exists? I'll unpack each of these. Second is how much support do you get as a person in that position? And then moving to the green is where you really see the kind of the opportunity come forth. And there's either opportunities for growth, for impact, or for exposure. So let's look at each of those. On the environment side, having a healthy business means that you have resources to invest in people like high potentials. It also means that there's not a lot of dysfunction. So I talk to my clients sometimes about, are we running on blacktop? Are we running in the sand? Or are we running in the water? Because there's different drag efficiencies that come in there, and I think of a healthy business as one where you get to run on blacktop, and for the most part, the effort that you exert gets translated into business results, as opposed to just getting dispersed through the dysfunction of the organization. Second thing is a performance culture. If you're a high performance person, you want a performance culture that's going to recognize it, and that part of the company is lit up. There are lots of organizations that are more politically oriented or political cultures. There are relationship oriented cultures. So one of the dimensions is performance. Does performance matter in this company? And then the last thing is strategic intent. As we talk about potential and high potential, that's about the future, and strategy is about the future, strategic intent. So you could have a healthy business, but if it's just going to kind of bump along and be the same healthy business, there's not a lot of opportunity to unlock the potential that you have. So I want some kind of strategic intent to be present in order to, have a basis or place where my potential can be unlocked. So that's the environment. In addition to that, a high potential position that as a company we could offer would also involve guidance. So the teaching and coaching and mentoring that would help to speed up the learning that you do. Second is supportive resources. So they're committing resources to the development of staff. And then the last is encouragement. And I think this is one of the hardest things. In the same way that I talked about energy of a leader, this is about the energy to want to develop your high potentials. And so it's one thing to put resources and say, we're going to send you away to training and hope that works. And it's another to then have somebody, when you come back, say, great, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to apply that? And not just have you on your own do it, but also have the company support you in doing it. When we talk about growth and the opportunity of growth, I think there's three different components. One is having increasing amounts of responsibility, and having your role matter, and growing in responsibility from where you were a year ago, where you are now, and the responsibility that you have in the future. And then besides that, there's two dimensions. One is novelty or the breadth. So if I'm doing new things, then I'm building my toolkit, and I'm going to be more broadly. I'm going to be growing broader. The second is getting more experience. So if I am able to follow something and pursue it for a year or two or three, and really run with it and the potential that it has, then I'm going to be adding depth to my experience. And it would be unusual for a job to have both of those. You'll find that in a growth company, you'll find that when you start a new division and they need to staff that with people, if you can get an opportunity that is in that, then you're probably going to be learning new skills, and you'll have the opportunity to run with it for a while. And so you'll get both breadth and depth. But a lot of times you only get one. And so the reason that this is a pentagon instead of a stack is because if I'm a high potential employee and I'm looking at a company in a position and thinking about whether it's a good opportunity, it's going to have a mix of these. It's going to, I would want an opportunity that I was looking at to have maybe 2 to 4 of these to feel like it was going to be a high potential opportunity. So that's growth. The impact, there are 3 different dimensions. One is the magnitude of it. Are you in charge of something? I think of this as maybe the fish to pond ratio. Are you a big fish in a little pond? Are you a little fish in a big pond? So what's the magnitude of the impact that you get to work with? The second is you could work in a job that has current impact. You're working in a part of the business where a lot of revenue is generated, or you're working with really important accounts, or have an important strategic initiative. So that's the current, or it could be that there's future potential, and maybe it's, again, if you're in a startup part of a growth company, it could be that you're actually kind of not having a big impact today. But 3 years from now, 5 years from now is where the impact is. There's no one of these that's better or worse. It's just using this to understand what you're looking for and what is being offered as you're looking at positions. The last piece is exposure. Just, relationships are so important in business, and so the ability to build up that part of your career is important and matters from a performance perspective. So when I think about exposure, I think of three elements. The first is there an opportunity to build your brand? If you're blogging under your name, or you're writing things, or you're going out and speaking, and you get to do it under your name, that is valuable and important for building your brand. And then you can have positions that build the breadth of your network. So you're meeting a lot of people, but you may not be engaging them very much. So I think of going to trade shows and meeting new people and going around and traveling and touching base with a number of relationships, but not really getting deep into any of them. Alternatively, you could have just a few relationships that you work very deeply with. All of those are good opportunities and ways that you can unlock potential. The path looks different, and there's no right answer. It's just looking at the opportunities you have and trying to figure out which ones will be best for your development. All right, so even though it doesn't look as much like a stack, that's the stack for a high potential position from the company perspective. So from here, then the question is, what do we do with this, with these two position stack and talent stacks? I think of them as broad frameworks on the left-hand side of this slide here to recognize the situation and recognize what kind of potential you're offering or you're looking for, to demonstrate the potential that you have and that you're offering, and then to build. And so the first step in a lot of the investment strategy work that I do is coming up with the right framework by which to think about the job that we have to do. And so I think these stacks are useful as broad frameworks to orient your discussions and individually or as a company for what you're looking for. So that's the broad use. They also can serve very specific uses of, you can turn these graphics into something that looks more like a report card or a scorecard, and go to, if I'm a high potential employee, this is something I coach the people I work with on. If I'm a high potential employee, I don't want to wait for my boss to come up with a framework by which they're going to evaluate my performance and my potential. I want to take responsibility for that. I want to drive that conversation. And so this could be turned into a report card where you self-evaluate and or ask your boss to evaluate on performance. How's my quality? How's my productivity? How's my reliability? Let's go, am I a B plus, or am I an A minus, or am I C plus? Just so you know where you think you are, but also just as importantly, where the people who are helping your career think you are too. These help on a similar vein to career path conversations, kind of circling the ones that are most intriguing to you, or thinking about how could this be developed into a path within the company and within the environment that I'm operating in. And then if you're a boss, if you're training and coaching high potentials, then these can be useful, and both are useful. If I'm a boss of a high potential, I'd want to use the talent stack to do a kind of report card on how do I think you're doing. And then I'd want to do the position stack to ask their opinion. To self-evaluate, what do I think is strong and what isn't strong, but then also ask their opinion about how are we doing here, and which of these factors are the most important for you. Because the ones that are important for you are ones that I'm going to want to make sure are strong on our side too. All right, so I think we're moving to ramp up here and see if there are any questions. So before I go into looking at May 2nd and the little teaser I have for that, do we have any questions?
Yes. So I had a question that came up about the importance of being transparent as part of the responsibility of a leader around, specifically when it's coming to implementing new initiatives.
Interesting. Okay, so the easy answer is to say leaders should always be transparent. I think the always is the problem there. The reality of the conversations that I'm involved with at the board level and stuff is that timing is one of the factors in leading and knowing what your organization needs. So I would say in general, the principle to operate from is transparency, but there is flexibility around timing, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done by a leader around packaging. So making sure that you're messaging in the right way. As a matter of fact, I was talking yesterday to a high potential person who said, the company needs to address some of the challenges that we've had recently, and I want to hear that there is a good vision in place, and I want to hear that what the path is going to be that's going to lead us forward, and so it spoke to me of how important messaging is.
Fair. And how can you, going back to the initial sort of 2x2 matrix that you had between potential and how they're performing now, how is it possible to differentiate between someone who might be performing poorly now but has high potential? How do you make sure that you don't let the poor performance cloud what their potential could be within the organization?
That's a great question, and I have never unpacked that to think of. I've been in that situation a lot and having to deal with it, but I've never unpacked it to figure out what's going on there. So let me see if I can do that off the top of my head. I would say one thing that I try is asking for things in a different way. So is there something about how I asked for it or the instruction that I gave or whatever that's missing? Another thing would be to experiment with slightly different tasks. So find out if we're giving very narrow tasks and I give something that's adjacent to that, is there any difference in what I'm seeing? And then the last piece, because so much of this involves being motivated personally and the high potential person themselves taking responsibility, I would want to see if they're engaging the process and understanding that they're not performing and looking to do things differently. So there are a number of instances where the employee knew that things weren't working well, and they made sure that the conversation came up with their boss because they were worried about not performing to expectations. And anybody that is worried about the future of their work and their job and that wants to contribute should be actively managing that. So those are three things that I've looked for. There's probably some more, but I can't think of them.
Fair. And how do you try and have someone move from where they're sort of meeting the core function that you had of the staff, I guess? And is it just awareness that you need to have, or that individual needs to have in terms of, oh, these are the things that I should be thinking about now as I try and grow? Is that one of the common barriers, or are there other barriers that people have as they're trying to move in from being really effective in their position to moving into sort of that leadership realm?
Yeah, so awareness is one, and I think the start of all development is with awareness. So until we can provide a framework that says, here's the overall landscape, and here's where you fall on the landscape, and here's what you are and what you aren't, then it can be hard to know, well, where am I trying to get to that's not where I am currently. And so I think a lot of it starts with awareness, and there are people that are more self-aware and less self-aware. So that absolutely is an obstacle or a barrier. Another one is you can look at the position stack and all those different things. So if you're not in a good environment or not getting the support you need, then those would be barriers, not internally generated, but barriers to that. A very practical one, especially for high potentials, is that they have a lot of work to do. And so and it's like, and they feel a lot of responsibility to getting that work done. And so they'll be focused on, I got to do this work. I don't have time to do the development. And I got really important customers, and I'm the one playing an important role on the team. These people just get pulled in all directions. And so carving out time to be able to step back out of that is really hard. And yeah, that's where I view it as the leader's responsibility. If you have a high potential person, you cannot leave it up to them to manage that. You have to say, I'm going to actively create the space for you because I know you're being pulled in 15 different directions. It's my responsibility as your boss to create that space for you, because it's just, when you're a leader 5 years from now or 10 years from now, you will know how to create that yourself. But that may be a skill or a muscle that you don't have yet. So you need to be helped with that.
Yeah, so it's almost somewhat counterintuitive to say, okay, I'm going to invest in some time and some white space for my own investment, and that's actually not a deterrent from my current day-to-day. That's actually an accelerant for continued growth.
Well, we talked about the difference between cost thinking and investment thinking. Right. Cost thinking is that's going to be a detriment. Investment thinking is that's going to make my life better a year from now. And that's part of, if I'm managing a high potential, that's part of what I'm listening for. And what I want to see from them that they're starting to do that math and say, yeah, I have to carve it out. And usually they don't start there, but after 6 months, after 12 months, if they truly are high potential or they're kind of on the right curve, they'll start to pick that up and do that.
Sure. So maybe let's move into talking over a little bit on the May 2nd webinar.
Great. So let me fast forward here. So this was about understanding potential. The May 2nd webinar is about developing the leader. So I think so much of it all needs to start with the business case. On the company side, understanding the opportunity and the costs and why it makes sense to invest in high potentials. And then on the high potential side, knowing what to ask for and how to ask for it. It all comes together in the business case, which is here's what I would like to do, or here's what we're proposing to do. This is the cost, and this is the return that we're going to get from that. So I think the business case of high potentials is useful for the company and the employee to know. And then I'll provide some development frameworks that are more conceptual to guide the thinking about what would development look like, what kinds of topics would we look at, and then also get more specific about what's the toolkit of development programs. I think as you get into development programs, that's going to feel pretty HRE. It's like these are the kinds of things that we do. But stepping back to that last question, another roadblock is having the high potential person having access in a kind of just-in-time learning basis to expertise that can help them address the problem that they have. And of course, Google is a wonderful tool for that, but also mentoring is a big part of what you need to do to unlock potential. So it'll be the business case as a foundation for why we should be doing it, and then some framework and programs for developing specifics. And the last thing I have is just a teaser thought that I'm pretty sure I'll cover next time too, but I use a lot when I'm talking to not just high potentials, but all young employees who really don't understand how a career is going to lay out and how to manage their investment and what returns they expect from that investment. So the top part of this slide has lines with different lengths and different trajectories or slopes, and I use that image to explain to young workers that they can choose different levels of trajectory. You can have a high slope where you're getting a lot of responsibility and you're getting a lot of reward and all that, but what comes with that is a lot of responsibility. Or you can pick a low slope, which means when your work is done at 4:30 and you want to go home, then that's cool, you can go home. The challenge is when people don't understand this dynamic and they want to be able to go home at 4:30 and they want to be promoted every 6 months. And like, I'm good with promoted every 6 months and I'm good with going home at 4:30, but it's against the laws of nature and against the laws of the universe to put those two things together. And just the reality of kind of a lot of young workers these days is that they have amazing technology skills and amazing network and social skills, but they also don't have a lot of times the same understanding of these natural laws of, you got to work hard if you want the reward. That wasn't something that they had reinforced a lot. Some did, but a lot of workers didn't. And so this trajectory idea is a useful way to frame for people. You can make whatever decisions you want, but those decisions are going to have consequences. And those consequences are not going to just be for your career, but they're also for us as a company. And that's the other piece of the different lengths of these lines is that, if you're only going to stay here for 2 years, then we as a business need to think about your development differently than if you're going to stay here for 5 years. And there's no guarantee in life, but that is a law, that is a practical law of profitability for the business. And I want to make sure that the employees in the business understand that those dynamics are going on.
Great. Well, I want to thank Dave for his time this morning, and I also want to thank all of you for your time and attention as well. Just, I guess, a re-reminder, we will have part 2 of the series on May 2nd, and we'll send everyone a link out to be able to register for that if you haven't had an opportunity to do so yet. And we'll also send this out as a, again, we are recording this, so we'll make sure that we follow up on those bases. So thanks to everyone this morning, and enjoy the rest of your day.